It has been a great trip, I replied with a slight smile. The man, seated beside me in the second row of first-class seats, was my boss and, for the past 7 years, also my father-in-law. When it was just the two of us, I called him Brian. In professional settings, however, I always addressed him as Mr. Brown, a formality we both silently agreed was necessary to maintain clear boundaries at work. I had married his only daughter a couple of years after joining his company, Brown Electricals. Fresh out of college, I was a young mechanical engineer with little more than potential to my name. Back then, the job market was stagnant, flooded with experienced professionals holding far more impressive resumes than mine. I knew he could have hired any one of them, but he took a chance on me. I had never forgotten that, and I worked hard to prove I was worth the risk. Honestly, I continued. I thought Parker Industries would walk away with the lion's share of this deal. Every time I spoke with Tom or Morgan in their purchasing department, they gave me the impression they were leaning heavily towards staying loyal to their established partner. It seemed like their long-standing relationship with that entrenched supplier would be difficult, if not impossible, for us to overcome. You know, Alex, I'm convinced you were the key to making this deal happen. 3 times their design team threw curveballs at us with those what-if changes in the specs, and every single time, you responded with 2 or 3 alternative designs that met their needs perfectly. They were clearly impressed by how quickly and effectively you handled those challenges, son. In fact, I think you've more than earned a nice bonus for the way you represented Brown Electricals down in Atlanta. I'll make sure that's taken care of as soon as we get back home. Thank you, sir, I replied, feeling a sense of pride but keeping my tone modest. I was just doing my best for the company. I'm glad it made a difference. It absolutely did. Now, the next step is ensuring we deliver everything we promised. I'm confident we will, I assured him. We've got a great team back at the office, and they take real pride in their work. They won't settle for anything less than delivering on our commitments. That's one of the big advantages of being a mid-sized company. We're small enough to care deeply about our reputation, but big enough to handle the workload. Brian chuckled at that, nodding in agreement. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, letting the hum of the plane fill the space between us. As the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing our approach to the home airport, we both shifted in our seats, buckling up again in preparation for landing. When we collect our baggage and load your car, Brian said, I'll probably need you to help me tote the boxes of prototype items into the house before you head off to meet your little bride. I promise I won't keep you long. He grinned at me rather devilishly. He knew how much I wanted to get home to my sweet wife after 5 days away from her and our bed. In the 7 years we'd been married and the preceding year while we dated exclusively, I'd never gone more than 3 days without her love and sex. Sure, I had traveled a few times in those years, but never for as long as this trip. Now I was extremely anxious to see my wife, Linda, as soon as possible and was just as sure that she'd be anxiously awaiting my return. As the plane continued its steady glide down the long approach to the runway, I let my thoughts drift away from work and onto my beautiful wife, Linda. We had first met back in college when she was just 19, and after a year of casual dating, we decided to make things exclusive. By the time she was 21, we were married, and even now, years later, she still looked as stunning as ever. Over time, her already gorgeous figure had matured in ways that only added to her allure. Her curves had become even more pronounced, her once round and perky features now giving her the kind of classic hourglass shape that I loved. Everything about her, from her warm smile to her playful laugh, still ignited a spark in me. Just thinking about her, I felt a familiar rush of excitement, eager to be home and back in her arms. I glanced over at Brian, and the faint smile on his face made me suspect he was lost in thoughts of his own wife, Brenda. It was hard not to notice the similarities between the two women. Brenda, now 48, was essentially a more mature version of Linda. They shared the same striking strawberry blonde hair, toned legs from their regular tennis matches, and that graceful, confident way of carrying themselves. If Linda were to grow into someone like Brenda over the years, I consider myself a very lucky man. After all, they say beauty matures with age, and I couldn't help but think how fortunate I was to have found a partner who made every stage of life so fulfilling. As the pilot's voice came on, announcing the final descent, I adjusted my seatbelt, my mind already filled with the anticipation of seeing Linda again. We touched down and taxied to the jetway. Being in the front of the plane, we deplaned quickly, but once we reached the baggage carousels, we had to wait 40 minutes for the luggage to start coming out. By the time we retrieved our bags and the 2 large boxes of prototype parts, Brian and I were both eager to get home. Fortunately, the Saturday afternoon drive was smooth. Since Brian and Brenda lived just 2 miles from our house, Dropping him off wasn't much of an inconvenience. As we pulled into his circular driveway, we were met with an unexpected sight. 3 cars parked out front, including Linda's BMW and 2 vehicles I didn't recognize. Any idea who those belonged to? I asked, nodding toward the unfamiliar cars. No, Brian replied, his tone heavy. I glanced over and saw his expression darken. I've got a bad feeling. Stay quiet and follow me. We got out of the car, leaving the doors open to avoid any noise. Brian tried the front door, but it was locked. Even after using his key to release the handset lock, the deadbolt remained engaged. Shaking his head, he quietly turned the lock back. The living room was empty, as was the den, though clothes were scattered around. Faint sounds from the hallway drew our attention, and we quietly made our way to the entrance of the master bedroom. The door was wide open, and what we saw inside was beyond belief. On the bed were 2 naked women and 2 naked men, engaged in sex. In an instant, I recognized the women, Brenda, my mother-in-law, and Linda, my wife. Hearing both women urging their lovers on left no doubt that this wasn't coercion. Brenda and Linda had willingly chosen to betray us. I felt a touch on my arm and turned to see Brian. Without a word, he gestured for me to remain silent and motioned back toward the hallway. I followed him to the den, where he opened a closet door. Son, I think I know you well enough to say you're not going to tolerate what we just saw. Am I right? No, sir, I won't. That just destroyed our marriage. Same here. I've had my suspicions about Brenda, but I never had proof until now. All right, here's the plan. He reached into the closet and pulled out 2 aluminum softball bats, handing one to me. Then he grabbed a digital camera from the shelf. We're going back in there. You take the far side. I'll take the near side. Let me get a few pictures first, and then we're swinging. Aim just between their legs. I knew exactly what he meant. Their target was clear, their balls. As we approached the open bedroom door, Brenda's voice carried out. Oh God, baby, I just love it. Linda's muffled reply followed. Oh, yeah, I'd have missed out if you hadn't shown me what. Her words trailed off as Brian's camera clicked. Linda's head was buried in the mattress, but the sound made her freeze. Suddenly, she started scrambling to get up. Before any of them could react, Brian set the camera down, and we swung the bats in unison. The sounds of passion were instantly replaced by the piercing screams of 2 men in excruciating pain. Both scrambled off the bed, collapsing onto the floor, curling into fetal positions as they clutched their groins in agony. Brenda and Linda bolted toward the head of the bed, frantically covering themselves in fear. Brenda whimpered, "Oh, my God, please, don't hit me." I vaguely heard Linda saying something, but it didn't register through the red haze clouding my thoughts. Glaring at the man who'd been with my mother-in-law, I raised my bat again, ready to strike. Alex, Brian's sharp voice cut through my rage, freezing me mid-swing. I looked up at Brian, who gave me a sharp nod and motioned for me to put the bat down. My chest was heaving, and my grip was like iron around the handle, but I forced myself to loosen my fingers and drop the bat to my side. Meanwhile, Brian bent down, snatching 2 pairs of pants from the floor. Calmly but with a dangerous intensity, he rummaged through the pockets until he pulled out 2 sets of car keys. Without a word, Brian strode to the window that faced the street. He unlocked it, shoved the storm screen back, and with a swift, practiced motion, hurled the keys out the window. He didn't bother to check where they landed, but judging from the absence of any metallic clink, it was clear they'd landed somewhere in the grass beyond the house. Then, with a grim, focused expression, he turned back toward the 2 men writhing on the floor. Brian grabbed the man closest to him, a wiry, younger guy who had been with Brenda, by his left arm and shoulder. The guy let out a high-pitched yelp, clutching his groin with his free hand. But Brian had no sympathy. You want to screw someone else's wife in my house? This is what you get. Brian growled as he dragged the man toward the window. The guy struggled weakly, but Brian's grip was unyielding. When they reached the window, Brian gave him one last hard yank and threw him out with no hesitation. The man screamed in terror as he tumbled headfirst into the rose bushes below. The sharp crack of branches and his panicked cries told us the landing hadn't been soft. I didn't wait for instructions. Turning to the other man, the one who had been with Linda, I grabbed him by the back of his neck and his belt. He was a bigger guy, but the adrenaline coursing through me made him feel weightless. He flailed in panic, trying to twist out of my grasp, but I wasn't about to let him go. You think you can come into my life, into my marriage, and walk away from this? I snarled. Not today. I hauled him toward the window, his bare feet scraping against the carpet as he stumbled. He gasped and begged incoherently, but it was just noise to me. Reaching the window, I shoved him through the opening with all my strength. His screams were louder and more panicked than the first guy's as he landed in the same rose bushes, thrashing and cursing as the thorns tore into his skin. Brian slammed the window shut with a loud thunk and locked it. He turned to look at the two terrified women still huddled at the head of the bed. Brenda was trembling, tears streaming down her face, while Linda stared at me, her expression a mixture of fear, shock, and something I couldn't quite place. My chest was heaving, and my blood was still boiling. But the room had gone eerily silent except for the muffled sounds of the men groaning outside. Brian's voice cut through now, he said coldly. We're going to have a little talk. The room filled with chaotic voices as both women started talking at once. It's not what it looked like. Brenda sobbed. I swear, Brian, I love you. You're the only man I've ever truly loved. Please, you have to believe me. Linda echoed her mother's pleas, her voice trembling. Alex, this isn't what you think. I love you so much. This was a mistake, a huge mistake. Please, just let me explain. Brian raised his hand, his expression dark and unrelenting. Shut up, he roared, his voice laced with fury and disgust. Both women froze, their mouths still open as if they'd been slapped. You don't get to explain a goddamn thing. You just admitted you've done this many times before. Don't think I didn't catch that little slip. He pointed his bat at Brenda, who shrank back against the headboard. You're not backing out of this now. What I saw was exactly what it looked like. You were screwing a man who wasn't your husband. That's not love. That's betrayal. Brian, please, Brenda started, but he cut her off with a venomous snarl. Don't. Just don't. You've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and now you want to tell me this was some one-off mistake? Do you think I'm that stupid? No, babe. Here's the deal. His voice dropped, cold and merciless. As of right now, you are free to screw anyone you want. Go ahead. Be my guest. Because you sure as hell won't be doing it as my wife anymore. Brenda gasped, her face going pale. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but Brian's expression was unmovable. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen, and held it up so she could see the time. You've got 10 minutes. 10 minutes to get anything you want out of this house. After that, anything you leave is going straight into the garbage, right where you belong. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. The clock's ticking, so start moving. Brenda looked at him, her lips trembling, but his glare didn't waver. She finally slid off the bed, clutching the sheet around herself, and stumbled toward the closet. I turned to Linda, who was still sitting frozen against the headboard. Linda, I said, my dear, sweet wife, the same rules apply to you. You've got 10 minutes to get to our house. And when you get there, you'll have 10 minutes to pack your things and get the hell out. Do you understand me? Alex, no. Please, she cried, scrambling off the bed and grabbing my arm. Please, don't do this. I love you. I made a mistake, but I can fix this. I can make it right. I yanked my arm free, the cold fury in my eyes making her take a step back. Fix this? I spat. You can't fix this, Linda. You chose this. You chose to destroy our marriage. You chose to betray me. And now you get to live with the consequences. I pointed to the door. Get moving. Don't make me repeat myself. Her face crumpled as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't care. I was done. I turned to Brian, who was standing with his arms crossed, his bat resting on the floor. I'll talk to you later, I said, my voice tight. He gave me a short nod, his expression grim. Drive safe, he said. Then he glanced at his watch and called out to Brenda, who was frantically shoving clothes into a suitcase. 9 minutes. I didn't look back. I didn't care to see Linda's tear-streaked face or hear her pathetic excuses. I left the room, my footsteps echoing down the hall, and walked out the front door to my car. As I got in and slammed the door, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I started the car and drove off, leaving Linda behind. It was just a short drive home, only a couple of miles, but I had to pull over twice to throw up before I made it. When I finally dragged myself inside, carrying the weight of everything that had just unfolded, I slumped into my recliner in the den, the overwhelming sense of betrayal nearly suffocating me. 5 minutes later, the door creaked open. Linda walked in slowly, her voice laced with uncertainty. Alex, can we please work this out? Is there any way to fix this? I stared at her in disbelief, my mouth hanging open as I processed what she had just said. No, there's no way. I never planned on marrying a 304, Linda. And that's exactly what you are, whether you get paid for it or not. You've got 9 minutes. She broke down into tears, her face crumpling as she began to sob uncontrollably. I just sat there, shaking my head in complete disbelief. How could she betray me like this? She wiped her tears away, her voice pleading. But, Alex, you're the only one I love. You can't just throw everything away like this. I couldn't keep the anger from boiling over. No, Linda, you're the idiot here. I'm not the one who threw it all away. You did. I yelled, my voice shaking with fury. 8 minutes. Linda's sobs echoed down the hallway as she moved toward the bedroom. She was dragging her feet, as if each step was a refusal to leave. The nausea was still threatening to overtake me, but I clenched my fists, refusing to let it win. After what felt like forever, I finally pushed myself to stand, and I trudged toward the bedroom. When I reached the bedroom, I saw Linda had thrown a few clothes into 2 open suitcases, but she was moving like she had all the time in the world. They weren't even close to full, and I could tell she was stalling, hoping I'd cave, hoping I'd forgive her. Without a word, I walked over to the suitcases and began zipping them up. What are you doing? She screamed from behind me. Her voice was shrill, panic evident as she rushed forward. I told you 10 minutes, I said, my voice cold and firm. I gave you 15. Now, you are out of here. I didn't wait for her to respond. I just turned and walked toward the front door with both suitcases in hand, the weight of them reminding me how heavy this all felt. When I got to the door, I tossed them out onto the front lawn. No, I snapped, rushing forward to grab her arm. She tried to pull away, but I wasn't having it. Let go of me, she cried, her voice frantic. You're not going to change my mind, I growled, using the same method I had with the other a-holes, shoving her through the door and onto the lawn. I wasn't going to be weak, not this time. She stumbled out, her hands reaching for the doorframe as I yanked her purse off the table. I pulled out the keys and tossed the purse after her, watching it land next to her in the grass. Take your stuff and get out, I said, my voice low but resolute. I'm done. Linda's scream as I slammed the door shut with a force that rattled the windows. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving as I tried to calm the storm inside me. I walked into my home office, sat down at the desk, and fired up the PC. Logging into our bank accounts, I immediately started transferring funds from the joint accounts into my personal one. I knew I'd have to give her something, but there was no way I was letting her drain our savings. Next, I headed to our bedroom. As I looked around, everything in the room seemed to scream her presence, her influence on every corner of our life together. I opened the window and began tossing out handfuls of clothes, dresses, shoes, lingerie, and personal items from the dresser. I even emptied the bathroom, throwing anything that reminded me of her out into the yard. I grabbed a picture of us from the nightstand, smashed the glass, ripped my image out, and threw the rest out the window. I could hear Linda calling out, pleading for me to listen, to talk to her, but I shut it all out. She had destroyed everything between us, probably long before I ever realized it. I had been too blind to see it until now. On Sunday afternoon, Brian and I spent some time commiserating and discussing our plans for the coming week. We both agreed to hire his attorney and use the same photos as evidence of infidelity. Despite hearing from many men who didn't want to hurt their cheating spouses, Brian and I were firm that adultery would be the grounds for our divorces. In our case, the only child involved was also part of the problem. As we made our plans, we realized that each of us had thought of things the other hadn't, and together, we supported each other through our shared loss. I had to admit that Brian's loss, his wife and daughter, was even harder than mine, though not by much. By the end of Monday, our attorney had been briefed and assured us that he would file the papers by the end of Tuesday. He also advised us about our financial responsibilities to our wives, which hit Brian harder than me, as he owned his business outright. However, our liability could be reduced if the court accepted adultery as the grounds for divorce. Since Sunday, both Brian and I had been bombarded with phone calls from Linda and Brenda, each of them trying relentlessly to reach us. They called our home phones, work lines, and cell phones. We quickly recognized their cell numbers and ignored those calls, but there were plenty of calls from unfamiliar numbers. We'd pick them up, only to hang up immediately when we heard the familiar whining voices of our wives. Our attorney eventually persuaded us to sit down with the women and discuss the terms of the divorce, hoping we might come to an agreement and avoid a court hearing. We agreed to meet together, since we were all family, and the event that had led to the end of our marriages was something the two women had shared responsibility for. Just after I sat down across the conference room table from Linda, she began to plead. Alex, I never meant to hurt you. I'm so sorry you found out. Please forgive me. I looked at her, astonished at her gall. You never meant to hurt me? You're sorry I found out? It was fine for you to carry on with your lies, spending our lives together while you cheated on me at every opportunity? You never had any intention of being faithful, even when we first got married. Forgiveness? That's not possible. I leaned back in my chair. Brenda turned to Brian. Brian, I understand that you're upset with me, but surely you won't turn your back on your daughter. Just as incredulous as me, Brian responded. My daughter? You taught her to do the same cheating things you did. You 304. And knowing what I know now, I have no reason to believe she is my daughter. The two women visibly drew back in horror. Brenda whispered, surely you can't believe that. In a very controlled tone, Brian responded, my daughter? You taught her to do the same damn thing you did. You 304. And now that I know the truth, I have no reason to believe she even is my daughter. I don't believe a word you say anymore, Brenda. And the only way I would believe she's my daughter is with a DNA test. But even if it proved she is, that doesn't change what you've turned her into. A hateful, lying 304 who can't keep her legs closed. You've ruined everything, and I can't look past that. Both women seemed to shrink under the weight of Brian's and my words, tears flowing freely, but neither offered any further arguments. After a few minutes, Brian and I quickly left the room while our lawyers took care of the final details. In the end, we were both required to share our financial resources with our ex-wives, but not as much as we would have in an uncontested divorce. I had mixed feelings about splitting my finances with a woman who had betrayed me so completely. We'd shared some good times together, though it seemed there were far fewer than I had believed. I felt she deserved something for those moments, but it still gnawed at my conscience that I had to give anything to a woman who had clearly never been faithful to our vows. But I supposed it was water under the bridge. Back at work, Brian stayed true to his word. Once things settled into a more normal routine, he awarded me a generous 5-figure bonus and a modest raise in my monthly salary. I was pleased with the arrangements, and it felt like a small sense of justice after everything that had transpired. Although neither of us openly discussed the details of our divorces, rumors tend to spread quickly in a workplace, and eventually, most of the facts came to light. It became evident when we had his admin update our insurance beneficiaries, something that sparked his curiosity. People connected the dots, piecing together enough of the story to come up with their own versions of the truth. That somehow, our wives had been caught cheating. While the details might not have been entirely accurate, the core of it was clear to everyone. After the divorce, Brian made a quiet resolution to focus on himself, choosing not to date again. He poured his energy into his work and the dogs that became his constant companions. Over time, he adopted a female German shepherd from a local shelter, and soon, she gave birth to a litter of 5 adorable pups. Brian, though clearly heartbroken from the past, found solace in caring for the pups, raising them with the same care and attention he once reserved for his family. Meanwhile, Alex took a different route. He slowly eased back into the dating world, deciding he wasn't ready to give up on love entirely. One evening, he met Sarah at a local cafe, and they hit it off almost instantly. She was intelligent, confident, and had a warmth that Alex found refreshing. Their connection grew quickly, and before long, they were officially a couple, enjoying dinners, weekend hikes, and quiet evenings together. Alex found happiness in the companionship Sarah offered, something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Alex also became the proud owner of 2 German Shepherd puppies, a gift from Brian who had kept 3 with him. They brought a new level of joy to his life, and he often found himself comparing their playful energy to Brian's dogs, both sets of pups bringing comfort and companionship in their own ways. While Brian remained committed to his dogs and his own peace, Alex embraced a new chapter, balancing his life between his girlfriend, his pups, and the lessons learned from the past. Both men, in their own ways, had moved forward, finding solace in different pursuits.